Hello everyone, my name is Ryan H. Lewis, and yesterday was Tuesday, my favorite day that comes after Monday, and it was absolutely bonkers at AWS reInvent. Even though I'm sitting here on the sidelines watching from a distance, I was completely overwhelmed by all of the things that were announced, all the things that were going on. We had live streams, we had keynotes, there's a lot of stuff to go over. And I was really worried because I was trying to figure out how I'm going to take all this information and stuff it into a video and get through it quickly without people falling asleep or even me falling asleep. So I'm going to try to do that. This may be a little bit fast, but hopefully there will be some insightful things about what happened on day 2 of AWS reInvent 2019. So first of all, how about that keynote? Well, I didn't actually see the keynote. So first of all, the Monday night keynote was at 7:30 my time, and the Tuesday keynote was at 9:30 a.m. my time. And, you know, in hindsight, it makes sense why the Monday night keynote would be later, because people might still be getting in, and the Tuesday keynote would be early because keynotes are usually in the beginning of the day. But I didn't think about that, and I just naively assumed that the keynote was going to be tonight, and it definitely wasn't. So they didn't post the video for the keynote, so I couldn't watch it. They actually posted it at like 12:15 in the morning of Wednesday, which I'm of course recording this really late, Tuesday night. And so I couldn't, I only watched a little bit and I couldn't really get through it. So most, if not all of the announcements from the keynote I'm going to go over, but I don't really have anything beyond it was a keynote and I didn't see it and I'll have to watch it later. But let's look at the announcements. This is everything that was announced today. And obviously each one of these titles has an entire article's worth of content behind it. There's just no way I can get through this stuff in a meaningful way so that you can understand all the details. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to play a little bit of a lightning round. I'll probably slow down for some of the things that I'm really excited about, that I was really impressed with. But otherwise, I'm just going to barrel through some of these, as well as there are a few that I don't fully understand. So I'll try to explain as much as I know, but I'm not the expert in everything. So like yesterday, I broke things down into categories. We've got a serverless category, infrastructure category, data, AI, of course AI, and everything else. That's the kitchen sink, the things that didn't necessarily fit in other categories. However, there are some really cool things in the everything else category, which is so it's very worth your time to stick around. We're going to cover those at the end, but they just didn't really fit in any of these others categories. So AWS was one of the first cloud providers that released some type of serverless thing with AWS Lambda, and they continue to do amazing things. This reInvent had some particularly good game-changing releases. I said I would go fast. I'm not going too fast yet, am I? I love serverless, so I might spend a little extra time. So for Lambda, they released a new thing called provision concurrency. So in Lambda, there's this problem that whenever you first invoke a Lambda, the code that has that Lambda has to get spun up on some hardware somewhere. Even though we're calling it serverless, there is a server that your code runs on. And we call that thing the cold start. A lot of times it's not that bad. It's I've seen it be around 4 or 5 seconds. I've seen it sometimes be closer to 10 seconds. But it's not the worst thing in the world. However, it is not really suitable for production workload. And so what people do is they keep their Lambda functions warm. And so what that means is they hit them every 5 minutes so that Amazon doesn't go and put that function code in cold storage. It keeps it running on a server out there. And AWS itself said today in this announcement that even though it's not really how it's supposed to be used, they don't really tell anyone that you shouldn't or can't use Lambda in that way. But what they did today is release this thing called provision concurrency, which is really exciting because basically you're able to say, hey, I'm expecting to have this X amount of Lambda different invocation instances available. I'm expecting to have load that needs that type of capacity. So just keep it available for me. And it can also be auto scaled. So if you're really not using it, that's okay. It can bring it down. But the weird thing is now it's kind of like, well, this is getting closer to just being an EC2 instance that you have sitting out there and you just run. It doesn't really do the whole pay only for what you use principle of Lambda, which was so cool in the beginning. You only pay when your code is running. So it changes that, but at the same time, man, getting rid of that cold start problem, or at least giving an option to get rid of that cold start problem, is amazing, because even if you take out of the equation the kind of pay for what you use, just kind of being able to take your arbitrary code and run it somewhere is pretty amazing. All right. So that was a big one, man. That was a big one. So I'm going to go a little bit faster through the rest of these. So AWS Fargate is kind of like serverless for containers. For a long time, it's only been able to be used by Elastic Container Service. So that's Docker containers. But now, whoops, out of order. Now Elastic Kubernetes Service is available for that. So if you've got Kubernetes containers, you can run them on Fargate. In addition, Fargate Spot was announced, which is, if you're familiar with EC2 Spot instances, it's basically these instances where you can say that you want these instances to be run, and AWS will run them when there's like leftover capacity around. So it's significantly cheaper. It's like half the price. But if you have jobs that don't necessarily need to run in any certain time frame, Spot instances are great. And now that's an option for AWS Fargate. So you can run your tasks on your containers just kind of whenever and save a bunch of money, which is neat. Amazon RDS proxy. This is another game changer for Lambda. Lambda always had this problem with database connections because that Lambda code is going back into cold storage. It can't keep or maintain a database connection. So what that meant is that your database options for really high performant database stuff was kind of limited to things like DynamoDB. Now we've got Amazon RDS proxy, which works with the MySQL protocol, which basically acts as a proxy in between your MySQL database and your Lambda function. And now you don't have to hold on to that connection because the RDS proxy is doing that for you. So you can just make calls to that RDS proxy and it will make the calls to your database and send them back to you. So you don't have to worry about maintaining the connection, losing the connection, creating a new connection, any of that. You can use this RDS proxy and it's pretty amazing. It also works with IAM and secrets managers, so you don't have to keep any credentials in your code. Really, this is one of the issues when people would come to me and say, yeah, serverless is great, but what about the database issue? And I didn't have a great answer. My answer was usually write a proxy and run it on an EC2 instance, which is silly, but it would work really well. Or just use DynamoDB. Now you don't have to do that. This is awesome. All right, let's talk about the infrastructure things. And there were quite a few, such as new instance types, which got a lot of applause when they were announced, such as the Graviton 2 powered ARM instance types. I don't really know what you would use ARM for in the cloud. I guess you can run Linux on it. I don't really know. I thought ARM was mostly for mobile devices, but I don't know much about hardware. There's a new instance type called the Inf1 instance type that's built with the AWS Inferentia chip, which is specifically for machine learning. And I think for doing inferencing, which is something I'm not completely sure about. But new instance types are always quite exciting. I don't know if all of you use these though, so that's cool. Okay, there's some really neat things, like AWS is coming to your neighborhood. Haha. We've got AWS local zones, and these are basically bite-sized data centers located in kind of geographic locations where there's lots of people. So they're ideal for low latency. Like if you've noticed all of the AWS regions and data centers, they're not really in the middle of nowhere, but they're kind of out of the way. You've got like Oregon, you've got Northern California. There's much more people in like middle or Southern California, or even like Seattle where AWS is. So why isn't there a region in Seattle? And usually that's because they're putting them out of the way where they can find cheap land with very sustainable and stable and ecosystems essentially. But these local zones are data centers, kind of like an availability zone, that are really close to where the people actually are. So they're really good for low latency. And they just launched in LA, which is pretty amazing. I'm expecting that these will be popping up all over the place around big cities. Probably New York, Seattle are probably in the works, as well as, I don't know, Atlanta. I can't think of other places. DC. Okay, I'll stop. We've also got AWS Outposts. So this is kind of this is a little bit like, I don't know, I feel like it's when people wear clothes from the 80s, or bring back Trapper Keepers or Lisa Frank. For me, for my generation anyways. AWS Outposts are on-premises hardware racks that you can purchase that AWS will come to your work and install for you and get everything set up. You use basically the same AWS software to interact with it, but it's sitting there right next to you. So it's really good for super duper low latency stuff, but it's a little weird because it was like there was on-prem and then everybody was moving to the cloud, and then this is kind of moving back to on-prem. I don't know. It's interesting. I can see for like research institutions and people who have need to run like supercomputers and stuff, this could be very useful. But I think it's kind of funny that we're going back to on-prem. AWS did another thing called Wavelength. And Wavelength is basically where they're putting AWS in the mobile carrier data centers. So whenever a customer is accessing your service via a mobile device, they're able to get to your service really quickly. The latency will be a lot lower because it can only just go on that mobile connection. It doesn't have to go from the mobile connection to the data center to then AWS and then back again. It cuts down probably on like half of the round trip, which is pretty cool. Verizon, KDDI, Vodafone, and SK Telecom were the launch partners. KDDI is in Japan, Vodafone, UK, and SK Telecom is South Korea. Verizon is in the US. So this is, I don't know, interesting. All right, let's move on to data. I got to speed up. Sorry. This is a lot of exciting stuff. So Redshift, which I don't know, I've never really used Redshift. I got out of the data world before Redshift was a thing. They did launch a new RA3 instance type. You can now configure the CPU and the storage separately. Before they were tied together, and now you can just say, I want, I don't know, 16 cores and 2 gigabytes or something. You can configure those completely separately now, which I was kind of surprised they didn't have to begin with. You can also export your Redshift data to S3 in the Apache Parquet, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, schema. And that makes it easy to create an S3 data lake, which is a great word, data lake. I want a t-shirt that says data lake. You can also do federated queries inside of Redshift to S3 and Postgres flavored databases in RDS, such as Postgres and Amazon Aurora, which means that you can basically, typically Redshift is like your data warehouse. Sometimes you want to access more live data that are in Postgres, and now you can do that with just in Redshift without leaving. There's also a new tier in Elasticsearch, which is called Ultra Warm, which is another t-shirt I want, Ultra Warm. And it's basically a cheaper tier for older data, for things that might not be accessed quite as readily as things you would leave in the regular, more expensive Elasticsearch tier. It's also funny, S3 went to Glacier for their cheaper, less access data service. Elasticsearch went to ultra warm. So I think this is interesting that they're using temperatures and kind of creating something. I don't know what ultra warm means, but they do call regular Elasticsearch tier data to be hot. So I guess that's where the ultra warm. They didn't want to just say warm. Maybe that just doesn't sound that cool. It's definitely a lot cheaper. Elasticsearch is expensive. Holy crap. All right, Amazon managed Cassandra. So I'm not too familiar with Apache Cassandra. I've heard about it, but it's a database service. It's for high availability. It's used for big data a lot. Now there is a managed service on Amazon, and it's totally serverless, which is really cool. Like that's what I'm really excited about. I hope they do that for more things, so you don't have to actually create any instances. You basically just tell them what you're going to need and what your data schema looks like, and they take care of the rest. So that's awesome. All right, let's get into AI. This is the golden child of AWS these days. They're innovating a lot, which is awesome. They are creating a lot of new stuff. But man, I mean, if you're not in AI on AWS, what are you doing? I mean, that includes me. I'm not in AI in AWS. This is another section I'm going to try to run through because my expertise is very shallow. SageMaker is what you can use in AWS to train your models. And they added a bunch of stuff for SageMaker. First of all, now you can use Deep Graph Library, which is useful for graph data sets. You can connect SageMaker to QuickSight, which QuickSight is AWS's BI service. And so now you can automatically get the SageMaker model kind of training results into QuickSight and analyze them easy. There's also SageMaker Studio, which is a full in-browser IDE for developing your models, which is amazing because I've tried to do ML stuff before, and sometimes just getting it working on your local machine was one of the hardest things. If I could just do that in the browser and have it work in SageMaker, that's amazing. With SageMaker Studio, there's more than just an IDE. There's also SageMaker Experiments, which lets you organize and track and compare your machine learning trainings. There's more SageMaker, 2 slides. This is the first. We've got SageMaker Autopilot, which basically you give it some data and it's going to do some pre-processing and figure out what algorithm is actually going to fit the best to your data and also come up with what hyperparameters you might want. So it's kind of neat to take some of the guesswork out of setting things up from scratch. You got SageMaker Processing, which allows you to run pre and post processing on your data sets, which basically it's something that people were doing before, but they were just doing outside of SageMaker. So now it kind of brings it in. You've got SageMaker Model Monitor, which lets you detect and track changes in the data that's being processed by a model. And then you've got SageMaker Debugger, which lets you debug those models. And both of those things are just really giving you more visibility into what your AI stuff is doing. Whew, SageMaker is done. Metaflow is a new framework, a new data science framework that is actually built by Netflix, but for AWS. Netflix is one of AWS's biggest customers, and Metaflow is something that they've been using. Basically, it allows data scientists to not have to deal with infrastructure on AWS and get just basically into the model development as soon as possible. And they open source that today, so basically anyone can use that. It handles all the infrastructure related to AWS and just lets them work on the things they want to work on. Then AWS also released Deep Java Library, which isn't a great name, really. It's basically an open source library for doing deep learning in Java. They could have called it like Tensor Java or I don't know, Java Flow. Like there's all sorts of names they could have used. We've also got Amazon Detective. These are all artificial intelligence things. We're like halfway through. This detects suspicious activity in your AWS account. I kind of feel like it's not actually similar to IAM Access Analyzer that was announced yesterday, because IAM Access Analyzer is basically just kind of looking at the documents that are there. Amazon Detective is actually using machine learning to look at activity that's coming in. It uses the logs from your AWS resources, and it processes those and looks for suspicious activity and lets you know. So it's an AI service that isn't doing AI for you. It's using AI as a product, which is pretty neat. There's also Amazon Fraud Detector, which is similar, but it's used for e-commerce. So you would be using it for customers. Amazon.com, it's basically what they use, and the experience that Amazon.com has with this stuff you get in this tool, which is pretty neat. There's Amazon Kendra, which I'd really like to see in action, because basically it's supposed to be a search service for your data at your company, but it uses machine learning and NLP to be able to kind of find answers. But the crazy thing is, when you do the searches, they want you to use natural language. And so I feel like it's like a personal Siri for your company, where you can ask things like, I don't know, who's our biggest customer? And somehow Kendra is supposed to figure this out. I'm really just curious who Kendra is. Like, was it someone's daughter? Was it the person who created this? Like, I'm curious. I want to know the secret behind Kendra. Then we've got Amazon Augmented AI. So you've probably heard in the news and press that there are certain companies that are basically saying they're AI, but have humans actually doing things in the back end. This isn't quite that. This is allowing humans to interact with machine learning basically while it's happening. So it's, instead of machine learning just models just doing their thing and coming up with stuff, which who knows where it came from or what it is, it's allowing humans to actually interact with that. So I don't know, seems pretty cool. This is actually in SageMaker, so I don't know why I didn't put it in the SageMaker slide. I guess I thought it needed its own slide. Then we've got Amazon Code Guru. So this one is pretty cool because it's doing automated code reviews, and it's using machine learning to analyze open source code and also Amazon's source code to basically figure out best practices, and then analyze your code to figure out when you're doing things wrong. The sad thing is it's only in Java. If you use Java, great. You can actually, this is live today, and it works with GitHub and Code Commit. The good thing about that is it works with GitHub, because I don't know that Code Commit has huge adoption yet, but this is pretty cool. You can basically run this on your source code today, and ideally it should give you some useful answers that you can actually do something with. So pretty cool. All right, kitchen sink, everything else. We're almost done. There's only a few more. This is the home stretch. Thank you for sticking around for this, because man, I'm really hoping that tomorrow is not the same as today, because I'd like to spend more time on these things, but I just kind of have to rush through them. So we've got AWS Compute Optimizer, which uses machine learning to analyze your EC2 instances. It detects over optimization or under optimization. And so this is really cool, because a lot of times you've got something running on EC2 instances, and who knows if you could use a smaller instance type or a larger instance type. I have personally looked for those answers before, and sometimes I just walk away feeling lost, because, you know, I could change something, but what if I screw something up? This actually looks at historical data and tells you much more authoritatively whether you should bump down to a lower instance type or not. And it'll tell you which instance type would fit your application better, which is amazing. All right, here's some things that I don't really care about. Elastic Block Storage Direct APIs. Apparently now you can access individual memory blocks in EBS snapshots. Not something I ever want to do. ECS cluster auto scaling. This introduces a new resource called a capacity provider, and it uses intelligent scaling for your Elastic Container Service clusters based on the demand. So a lot of times auto scaling works on like CPU or memory. Well, not memory, but CPU or network in or out. This looks at actually the demand of stuff that you have coming in instead of the individual instances. So this is pretty cool. I need to use ECS a lot more. Then we've got step functions. Another thing that I never got into, which is sad. They introduced express workflows, which is a new type of workflow. It's for high volume, short execution workflows. So regular workflows can last up to a year. These can only last for 5 minutes, and you pay for them differently. You pay for them based on execution time, and they have much higher volume that they can handle. So new feature in step functions. The last thing, S3 access points. So when you've got an S3 bucket, you have to set a bucket policy. And for me, that makes me usually end up making a lot of different S3 buckets because I need different bucket policies for them. Now with S3 access points, you can have multiple IAM policies on a single bucket, and your different consumers, you would give them different URLs for access points, and their access would be different based on those URLs, which is super cool. This is available now. I was messing around with it earlier today. So what did you think? Day 2, are you as overwhelmed as I am? I'm interested to actually play with some of these things, especially the serverless things, and see how it actually affects the day-to-day operations of an application. But let me know in the comments. My name is Ryan H. Lewis. You can catch me on Twitter or GitHub at Ryan Murakami. And my website is ryanlewis.dev. It looks really crappy right now, so I apologize. And are you interested in learning AWS? I teach AWS at Pluralsight. I've got a lot of courses. You don't have to know anything. Basically, I start from scratch and take you to someone who can actually do things, which is awesome. We do hands-on demos. We build things in the course. It's great. Pluralsight is great, but my courses are super great. So check it out at my author profile. Right now, up until, I don't know, for a couple more days, Pluralsight's offering 40% off, which is an insane deal. I don't know that they've ever had a deal this good. I don't get anything if you go do that other than watch my courses. But anyways, if you want to learn AWS, check it out from me at Pluralsight. And thanks for watching the video. I will talk to everyone tomorrow.